Welcome to Cybercast, decoding today's cyber issues. I'm Alexander Bolova, production lead at GovCIO Media and Research. With me today is staff writer-researcher Anastasia Obis. Hi, Anastasia.
Hey, Alex.
So you recently talked with Sherry Thomas, the cyber technology officer at the U.S. Marine Corps. How'd it go?
It went great. I wanted to ask him about all things related to standing up a unified network. So really dove into what they're currently working on, what it takes and what it will take the service to have a unified network, what some of the challenges are, what his concerns are. We talked about concepts like stand-in forces, bringing capabilities to the edge. So it was a great conversation.
So unified networks. I'm going to be honest, I am not entirely familiar with that concept. Could you tell me a little bit more about those and what it means to stand up a unified network at the Marine Corps?
Yeah, of course. So the Marine Corps is actually predicted to be the most distributed force ever by 2030. And it means that they will operate in highly contested environments and they will face competitors with really significant command, control, communications, cyber intelligence capabilities. And that just presents a huge threat to networks, which is why we're seeing a lot of efforts from different service branches to modernize their networks. And not just that, but also create an environment where different service branches can communicate with each other, breaking down silos and passing information easily. Because as it currently stands, it's actually very challenging to do that. And, we're seeing some of the efforts like GovCIO, among others. But we know that the Marine Corps will operate in a very distributed manner in areas like the Pacific. So it's just extremely important to modernize what in some cases are very arcane networks. And standing up a unified network is basically having a network that is secure and that is accessed easily and that enables multi-domain operations.
I do have to ask, when you say a very dispersed Marine Corps, does that mean space?
Who knows?
Who knows if I'll keep this in the episode? I just want to know if we're going to get like Space Marines, if that's the goal of all this.
They're looking into, it's actually one of the things that they're looking into, the Army's looking into, but the space is such an uncharted territory. No one knows what to do with it as it currently stands. So we'll see.
We definitely will. Well, bringing it back down to Earth, is there anything else that our listeners should know before jumping into your conversation?
I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. And I think I see a lot of this conversation from different service branches. And first of all, edge computing is so vital to the warfighter, but securing networks and enabling data access at network edge, it's very difficult. It requires a whole infrastructure that's been in the works, and that's something that they will continue to work on in the coming years. Also, when it comes to standing up a unified network in the tactical space, things operate differently from the enterprise space. And there's a whole slew of challenges that comes with that. Like, what does it take to have that? I see a lot of conversation around identity management and that it remains a priority and a challenge and concern. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to have a system where no one has to sign into several different systems, but have a single sign-on. And it's easier said than done. Also, Sherry said that he has concerns for the future of artificial intelligence and how that's going to shape out. So yeah, we cover a lot of different things as it relates to having a unified network in the service. And yeah, I'm excited for everyone to listen to it.
Yeah, so am I. It is a jam-packed episode, so let's not wait any longer. Let's take a listen to your conversation.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And to kick off the conversation, could you introduce yourself very quickly and tell me about your career and what your current role entails?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, first of all. And it's a great opportunity for everyone to stay engaged in what's going on in terms of the space that we are speaking to today. My name is Sherry Thomas. I am the Cyber Technology Officer, and I'm also dual-hatted as a tech director, technical director for 4 different organizations. And I'll get into that later, because first I want to start off in terms of that trajectory and how did I get there. Started in my career on the Air Force side, looking at networks, which is the transport side of how things move around from a network space in both the tactical side and the enterprise side. Then I moved over to the Army. And in the Army, I did a host of different areas in terms of the transport network, the data, and the security piece of it from both the offensive and the defensive side. So it's arranged in terms of research and development to program executive officers that are fielding equipment, and then sustainment. I've worked in all 3 of those areas. I did get to work at the Pentagon in terms of a strategic overarching perspective and looking across the entire portfolio of all acquisition logistics and technology within the Army, primarily focused on intel, EW, communication, command and control systems that go on ground, and aviation systems. So that was a good lead-in to the next thing where if people are following the news, in 2018, the Army made a significant change and created a new command called Army Futures Command. Helped to stand one of the CFTs, the cross-functional teams, which is the network cross-functional team, and looked across the entire spectrum from the requirements all the way to sustainment of some technologies. And this had to look in terms of new paradigms because of how quickly technology changes and how to adapt to it. And we can hear some of that in different other avenues that are going on too, in terms of the commercial space and the government space trying to keep up with industry. Which leads me into my current role, which is with the United States Marine Corps as a cyber technology officer and the tech director, as I mentioned. And I'm looking at the enterprise side and the tactical side. So what that entails is we are the service cyber component to United States Cyber Command. We are the space component to United States Space Command. We are also the service component to Special Operations Command, and we heavily support the Indo-Pacific Command. In addition, we are actively working with JFHU Joint Force Headquarters, DODIN, in terms of the secure, operate, defend part of the network. And we are the service cyber component. I know I put a lot of those words and things in there. It's basically all of the technology and all of the transport of that technology from the communication space goes through our channels for current operations. That's in a nutshell. And we look at multiple different areas that come in current operations, if you will. So I'll leave it at that.
That's a lot of work. And I really wanted to talk to you about the efforts to create a secure, unified network that enables multi-domain operations. And, considering the geographic diversity of where Marine Corps facilities are, it's also predicted that Marine Corps will be the most distributed force in the future, operating in highly contested environments. It will require a capable network to work in those environments. So could you take me through those efforts? What's going on in that space? How do you think about standing up a unified network? What is your vision? And also, how you're planning to bring connectivity to the edge?
Absolutely. Yes, as you have mentioned, there's something called MIXEN, Marine Corps Enterprise Network Unification. And that unification is everything from the enterprise layer down to the tactical MEFs more force. And how are we doing that? Because we are distributed force, we have to make sure that data comes across, right? That's the relevancy of the fight, that we have the appropriate information at the right time. To do that, you need to have an adequate transport network. So that transport is multiple redundancy. It could be line of sight, beyond line of sight. It could be aviation links. It could be satellite links. And it could be cloud architecture. So we look at the entire paradigm in what is the art of the possible, bridging those tactical dismount. They call it DDIL environment, dismount, low bandwidth, intermittent connectivity type environments, and bridging it back. Now you have to get to what is the availability in the network and figure out what data can be transposed. Sometimes you cannot get 4D high definition quality video or photography, for example, pictures, images. It might have to just be basic chat messages that have to come through. And then when network availability happens, then the rest of the streams can come through. So it should not be the user that determines any of that or make configuration changes. The network has to autonomously do it. And we have something called auto pace, which is preliminary, alternate, contingency, emergency responses. And all of that has to be done through the network. And it has to figure out, do I go through one stream versus another stream? Do I provide video? Do I not provide? Do I provide image? Maybe instead of 4D high quality, down to lower and lower levels where you can just see pixels or dotted lines. So that's where we're getting to. So it's all about speed, range, and convergence. You kind of hit on something in the beginning, which I want to highlight a little bit too. Part of Mixen unification is something called Task Force Network Modernization. It is part of the Force Design 2030, which is the modernization of the entire network. We cannot have an arcade network from the 90s or even from about 10 or 15 years ago because things change so rapidly and we have to keep up with it. To do that, we have divided this up into multiple different areas. We're looking at the networks and services, which is the transport side. We're looking at the data and the AI in terms of how do you break out of all the different silos of all the data and the information presented holistically. We're looking at federation of clouds because there are many different clouds and how do you bring it all together. And then the last piece is talent management. The person at the end of the day, whether it be a tactical user or the enterprise user, has to be able to know how to use this stuff properly and what all these layers behind are that it does. We cannot simply be like, here, go with it. And the other thing is you cannot give anybody a 250-page manual anymore. In today's day and light, an iOS or an Android, you start using it and you're good to go. You can provide your basic functionality. If it's something additional, yeah, there's a wiki or there's some learning process to do it, but that's something for the individual to go and figure out. And it has to be all web-based. Hopefully that answered it. Thank you.
Yeah, it did. And, you touched a little bit on it. But what about some of the challenges that the service will need to work through? You talked about data. So I'm curious to hear about what challenges are associated with that. How is the Marine Corps thinking about the infrastructure that is needed to have a unified network? And, could you elaborate a little bit on the challenges operating in remote environments?
Absolutely. Yes. So what is being operated today in an enterprise with a lot of power and a lot of size, weight, capacity is not something you're going to have at the tactical edge. So we have to be aware of that. We have to also be aware of jamming and so multiple resistance and redundancy is required. So if something that is not working, there's a backup option and there's a third backup option. So we're working through those scenarios in the different theaters, if you will. And because we are a stand-in force, we're required to go out into those theater areas and figure out what those reachback communication mechanisms are. We are also working with our industry partners, so that they are a vital cog in this whole construct, because we got to figure out with them what is the art of the possible, and what does from their business lens and from their technological lens, are you seeing this side of the view, which is, hey, there's a marine up on a hill somewhere in the remote Pacific island, and how do they get reachback communication? We've got to test all these things out, multiple research and development and test and evaluation scenarios. A lot of experimentation is happening, going through all the different use cases, if you will, and scenarios.
Could you give me an example of a use case?
Yes. So we did a couple of the exercises. We are tied with the Army's Project Convergence. We are tied with the Navy's Project Overmatch. And we are inserting ourselves from a joint all-domain command and control perspective to ensure there is, both from the service perspective and from a coalition perspective, different exercises. You probably could see what's going on now out in the public too, in terms of different things that we are tied into. But we're trying to maximize as much as we can in terms of what our partner nations and our coalition forces are providing. The other piece that I want to also highlight is that we are tied at the hip with other departments within the government too. Department of State, Department of Transportation, for example, Department of Energy, because these are big ones that help us shape in terms of what our future looks like, based on data centers, if you will, for the what's happening here on site and how things are getting deployed. FCC, for example, provides some things back to those commercial vendors. So we've got to be cognizant at the larger level and provide feedback appropriately, not just within this space, but in the larger. Over.
Right. And could you also elaborate on what you're learning from your sister services, who is doing it well in this space, and how you're collaborating on standing up a unified network?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I was fortunate enough to come from the Army side. The Army is also working on an Army Unified Network strategy and plan. So we are leveraging best use cases with that, knowing that the Marines operate differently. And it also, you have to have a cognizance of how the architecture was developed and what can be replaced. In the future, we want to maximize replacement as much as possible, hardware, software solutions, not be so tied down that it's very hard to change. The other piece that we are leveraging as much as possible is the Navy side. Our sister from the same department, on different scenarios that they have from the ashore and the afloat side. There's a lot of lessons learned from there with the Marines that are on board there. So that's a perfect use case scenario. And then the third one that I would say is the actual Indo-Pacific theater, or the appropriate theater that we're working on. And all of our coalition partners and our joint partners that are persistent there helps us keep iterating and keep learning as much as possible.
Yeah, and also going back to something you mentioned, could you, for those who don't know, could you explain the stand-in forces concept, and also what you're learning from exercises and experimentations conducted in the last couple of years, and how that's informing your approach to force design?
Absolutely. So it's basically be ready to fight tonight at any time. To do that, we need to share information. And that sharing information has to be based on scenarios, if you will, with what our relationships are with partners, what our relationships are with our allies, and what is the pertinent information. That too is not something a human or a user should be doing. It should be the system trying to figure out what is that pertinent information based on the available bandwidth of it, and have the appropriate protections in place that whoever I'm routing it to or moving it over to also has privy or awareness to get that information and use it appropriately together, if you will. That's the basics of it. You need to have a level of trust, and you need to have a level of understanding of the inherency in terms of what we're doing and what someone else is doing. That, again, it's not the human or the collective group that should be determining, but which other system is it going to? What is going to happen with that, right? Heuristic analysis or neural learning, that kind of stuff. So it's an augmenting of both the intelligence space, the technology, and the users that are trying to do a mission.
Yeah, and you're at the forefront of zero trust implementation. Could you talk a little bit about what that journey looks like and how you're coordinating your data readiness efforts for the framework implementation?
Absolutely. So most people are probably aware of the DoD Zero Trust Strategy from the CIO office. So we're actively nested there in terms of 7 pillars. And from those pillars, in particular, what we're looking at is from an enterprise DCO perspective. We hit on earlier in terms of the enterprise to the tactical, right? We are trying to glean as much information from the tactical users, because at the end of the day, it's those endpoint devices that are providing all that information back up to the enterprise, and that's what creating an enterprise. So knowing that, we have to figure out user analysis and user behavior in terms of what is anomalous, what's mistimed, is somebody logging it at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. in their time zone, and what the reason for that is. It shouldn't be a person and a cybersecurity person that has to log in at that time and say, hey, should they be getting access to this or not? It should be the system. And that's what the zero trust construct is. Right? Then the data and the analytics piece in terms of what is the conglomeration of all this information and what type of access should each user need to get, right? If you're a person that's doing some mission down on the tactical edge, why do you need all that enterprise level information, right? And then there's 2 others. There's a security incident or event management and security orchestration and response, SIEM and SOAR, those kinds of tools and techniques. What are those things from the big data platform level? So we have to be aware of what's happening as things get fed up. What is the current state and how is it moving along in terms of any different things that are happening either from the outside or from the inside. So that's the entirety of that zero trust. Looking also from the network space in terms of how are things being configured, how is it being changed, as much log management as possible so that we see the totality. The other organizations from the DoD side that are critical to this is the Chief Data and AI Office, along with the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, looking at the new stuff, and the acquisition and sustainment side in terms of what are we seeing today and how do we improve upon it. So looking across that whole stream, the other piece that I did want to mention is the service. The Marine Corps has a Chief Data Office. So that's looking at all of the different data that's coming in from, for example, from a personnel readiness standpoint, from the information standpoint, from the technology standpoint, from the intel, bringing it all together into one common operating picture so that we have the best analytics as possible.
And speaking of access management and data tagging and what sister services are doing, the Army is currently conducting a gap analysis of what's needed for zero trust implementation. Is there a similar effort happening in Marine Corps?
Yes, we are doing an analysis, and we are doing this iteratively. We continually do that analysis. It's not a one and done game, because as I mentioned earlier, as things keep changing and as the threat keeps changing, we have to keep up with that. So that current state, and then we do those delta models every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 3-month quarterly updates, and trying to figure out what the changes were and to adapt to it. How quickly can we adapt to it? It's not just the Marine side, but the Marines with the Navy too. Probably are also tracking flying speed and some of the things that are happening from the Navy and the Department of Navy CIO perspective and the CTO perspective. We are nested there too. So we're looking across multiple streams because we do understand our mission is a little bit different from the Navy and from the Army. But then what are those best case things that we can learn and use from everybody else?
What are the gaps that you're seeing that are specific to your service?
Absolutely. Transport is a big one because of, as we mentioned earlier, the way that we fight and where we fight, how we fight is completely different from everybody else's. The other one you probably can see from what's happening in the news and in recent events is what is that low Earth orbit, mid Earth orbit, geosynchronous satellite space going to look like? We need to get more understanding of that as things go along. The other thing that has recently developed is artificial intelligence and machine learning with tools like ChatGPT. What is the art of the possible? And when it's released in the wild, what are the adversarial effects? What are the ethical concerns? What are the behaviors? How much can we trust it? So you have to look at it from the totality in multiple different lenses. And that's what we're trying to get to, because only when you understand that can you understand true machine learning.
Yeah, and speaking of AI and other emerging technologies, what are you looking to leverage in your zero trust implementation efforts?
Sure. So there will be some main two things are interoperability and integration, right? Between our service partners, between our coalition partners, and as we have some legacy systems, we have newer systems. How do you ensure there's interoperability between somebody that has the latest and the greatest and somebody that might be a couple of years behind? The communication, the basic elements have to still go across. So we have to be cognizant of those things, even as we go after the latest, greatest, shiny object. Because if only 10 or 20% of the force is able to communicate with each other, we defeated our entire purpose of doing this whole thing. So we're trying to look at it in different iterations. A try, buy, fix, if you will, or fix, practice, fix type thing. And the only way to do this is through multiple exercises. Those couple of technologies that we've already mentioned, right? Satellite technologies, artificial intelligence. What are the security needs is another big one. Cybersecurity, as we can see in the totality of space, the Department of Navy has something called Cyber Ready, which we are nested with, which is assume a breach or assume somebody got into your castle. Now, how do you protect only a certain set of it or segregate it as much as possible through zero trust principles? And that's what we need to, or we are striving to get to. And then you get from the big data platform, from the user analysis and the tools available, how do you break it up so that it changes so rapidly that whatever information was provided is already out of date?
Right. And also, just one more thing that I wanted to ask about your first software factory. You just stood it up. Could you dive a little bit into it and what's happening there right now, what you're working there?
Absolutely. So this one too is a joint thing with the Army because we are co-located there. And so we are using best of breed products and solutions and experience that the Army has gained for the last couple of years when they stood it up. In addition to that, what we're doing different is basically our use cases and how our systems are implemented. So the idea is that you have a 24-month window for coders to get trained, work with industry through fellowships, and then put out new products and new solutions out to the fleet. And we're going to do this through best breed type solutions from industry as well. That's what we're learning in terms of the processes for approvals and getting things released into actual programs. So the two elements of that is, one, a coder will have the ability to go after one of these chores and go into one of the tactical edge and figure out what kind of additional value can I provide. If there's a bug or if there's a certain issue, I don't have to wait for 30 days or 60 days for something to get fixed and then get dropped overnight, right? And it doesn't have to clog up bandwidth anymore. We can do some minor changes based on, things that the approving official has to say, hey, is this risk tolerance or not? And then the other part is, once we have a group like this, then the entire Marine Corps becomes much more credible in what we can do. It's like similar to driving a tank or flying an aviation aircraft or system. Every Marine becomes a coder at that point. We can all try to fix stuff on the fly with that have minimal, changes required or things that can be done very quickly. We don't need to have all this reach back capability. So it's learning as we speak, if you will.
Right. And could you give me an example of a use case that you can talk about that you're currently working on?
Yes, there's a couple of our tactical systems that are run through systems command, communications and electronic systems that they're going to start, doing some of this through the paces first at the software factory, see how those changes affect, and then go through the pipeline, if you will. And then once those pipelines are put into place, then those same pipelines will be used by the program of record downstream too. So the classic model is the R&D into the acquisition, and then the acquisition, puts it in terms of fielding to these systems. But once it gets fielded, then it goes into sustainment. But now when you do a DevSecOps model, you're doing it all at the same time, iteratively, multiple times. Maybe you are changing multiple different code lines every single day too.
Right. And just a couple more questions. First of all, could you talk a little bit about your 3 top cybersecurity priorities? We've talked a lot about it, but your 3 priorities, also what you're planning on working on this year and what you're looking forward to.
Absolutely. I'll do 3 big ones and then I'll separate that out a little bit. The number 1 item is extend unification. We kind of hit on it. The network and to reduce bifurcations in the network. If you have the totality of the network, then we have more and more in terms of a big data platform and more in terms of analytics that are happening. At the same time, we have to be aware of cybersecurity in terms of how do we cordon off certain areas when it is needed, and Zero Trust helps with that. Which leads me into number 2, which is the data awareness. A common operating picture and have situational understanding of the entire battle space. So we are framing that in terms of enterprise defensive cyber operations. So from a defensive posture, looking at it from the totality. Big data platform is one area that we are working with, and it helps because the Army, the Air Force, Navy also have a similar big data platform. So we are using best of breed solutions and lessons learned from the other services, especially the Army. They're a little bit forward on this one. And the third one is workforce and talent management. Talent management 2030 is another thing that's going down for force design. The digital literacy and the upskilling. So it's not just the coders that are at the software factory. There might be only a cohort of folks there, but the entire Marine Corps has to understand what is happening, how are the zeros and ones flying across, what is needed, what can wait to do your particular missions, right? User posture is another one. We all have to be aware of cyber resiliency and cyber awareness. We cannot just take that on the back burner and say, my system is getting protected, my PII, my PHI, or my everything is okay out in the wild. It's not. We are trusting our fingerprint systems or our passcodes or things on our end user devices in the commercial space. We have to do the same level of protection in the space that we are working in terms of the DoD networks. So the people are the best defense, basically. And to have cyber hygiene, that cyber hygiene is, as threat and systems keep evolving, we have to understand at the granular level, I would say back to kindergarten, to say, how are these things getting architected, and how is the cloud moving stuff across? What is happening at the tactical edge? How is it feeding back in? Those kinds of use case scenarios have to always be on people's perspectives and minds, on what should I be asking for and what's the network availability. It's great if we have a lot in terms of a fixed space that has tons of bandwidth. But when we're moving around, we cannot expect that same level of full motion video or high graphics imagery.
And to just quickly follow up on something you mentioned, how are you working to promote that digital literacy across the service?
Absolutely. Yep. One of those, as I mentioned, was the software factory, but it's also rotations, right? Marine Corps cyberspace is a great place. You get to learn a lot of different things from that cyber environment and what is the current state or the picture there. The other side is the R&D side, right? With our partners from the Navy in terms of the program executive offices who are architecting the next network, the next data protocols and standards, with our systems command organization. So that's where we look at the entire Marine Corps Navy enterprise. And then I'll bring in the larger JADC2 enterprise too, and saying we have to always be aware of what's happening with those around us, right? On the Army side and on the Air Force side. It's not just the planes are going across or the kinetic stuff, right? How are the zeros and ones going across? One of the big constraints in the commercial side and the military side is battery power or power in any system, right? Whether it be diesel or fossil fuels or any other stuff, you got to bring this stuff with you. The logistics tail behind all these things, the size, weight, the capacity of an individual or a system to hold all this weight. You had to consider all these things. And then back in the day, we all remember all of our desktops or mainframes had all these wires going this way and that way and sideways. How do we efficiently move those things across and connect the systems to the least as possible, whether it be in a ground vehicle or in a dismount person that's moving around with some goggles on and Internet of Things in their profile. So we just have to always be cognizant of all the different things that are available. It is the art of the possible, but you cannot also expect the same as walking down Main Street with a lot of 5G bandwidth out there.
Right. Sherry, thank you so much. Any final thoughts about the unified network or zero trust implementation efforts?
Yeah, a couple of one other thing they kind of hit on. What are the things that I worry about? Getting a couple of things right. RBAC and ABAC, attribute-based access control, role-based access control, cybersecurity baked in early, hybrid cloud solutions. We understand, as we mentioned earlier, in the tactical space, things operate differently from the enterprise space. What is that hybrid cloud? Not everything can be in the cloud because there might not be some reach back. Then what does the dismount user get in terms of physical hardware right? And how is that protected? So we got to look at those kind of things. Then when we're architecting new things, cloud native access points and cloud native technologies built in, so we don't have to re-architect from the ground up. And then from a cloud perspective, multi-cloud, right? There's different things that are being used, and then we have to work with our partners and or different organizations. How do we harvest all the information as much as possible? Identity management is a big thing for me in terms of I don't want to sign into 4 different systems. I want to have a single sign-on. Everybody should know who this individual looks like, or the system anyway, or the fingerprint. That should be across. And then that goes into ICAM and IDAM, which is the identity credentialing and access management across the entire spectrum. So that's what I leave with. What I do have a little bit of concern for the future is how artificial intelligence is going to shape out, and what are the limitations from the space side.
Right. Sherry, thank you so much for joining me today and for sharing the insights about what's going on in the space.
Cybercast, along with GovCast and HealthCast, is a production of GovCIO Media and Research. For more podcasts and to check out the other shows, head to govciomedia.com. Watch out for new episodes released every Tuesday and Wednesday across our shows. You can follow all of them on your favorite podcast platform. And if you like what you heard, make sure to let us know by leaving a review. And if you have any topics you think we should look into, contact us at newsletter@govcio.com.